All right, it's time for the Gorgias. Um, the Gorgias is a very long dialogue. I understand that. And this is going to take a while. So uh, relax, settle in. Let's talk about the Gorgias. All right, first of all, Gorgias, the man, he's a real person, by the way. Uh, Plato tended to base his characters in his writings on real people. Um, Again, just to remind you, I've mentioned this earlier. This is fictional. This never really happened. All right. Did Gorgias actually meet Socrates in real life ever? Who knows? Um, if he did, it certainly did not happen this way because the Socrates in this dialogue is definitely a fictional Socrates. You can tell by what he says that this is mostly Plato's ideas being expressed here. This is a much later dialogue, so a lot of these ideas are Plato's and not Socrates. Sorry, again with the allergies a little bit here. So Socrates is, the way that people describe this is Socrates is Plato's mouthpiece, which is fairly accurate. In other words, Plato's expressing his views through Socrates' mouth, put it that way, in these dialogues. I'd caution you to be aware of the fact that that's not the only way that Plato expresses his views. This is a work of fiction, so other things do make a difference, like when a character enters a scene, where a character leaves a scene, and even the words that Plato puts in the characters' mouths. I mean, he could make Gorgias sound any way he wants. This is made up. As I mentioned, though, Gorgias is a real person. We have a little bit of writing from him. Sorry, I know my nose is all red right now. Okay, so he's a famous sophist. Gorgias is a famous sophist. He comes to Athens. And this is how the story is depicted and how the stage setting, if you will. And he comes to Athens and he's giving a big speech. And essentially the speech is a recruiting speech. I mean, remember the sophists make a lot of money teaching wealthy children or young adults. And so he's trying to drum up some business. And he's not from Athens, by the way. He's from, I think, southern Italy, I believe. I'm pretty sure. But Athens is a prime recruiting ground. So he's giving a big speech. We don't see the speech. Right at the end of the speech, Gorgias asks if anybody has any questions. And this is where the dialogue begins. I should note also, by the way, that this whole thing is happening at a big mansion, basically, a really big house, a mansion that's owned by Callicles, who is a politician, and there's three people that speak to Socrates in this interlocutors. That's what the term would be, and Callicles is the third of them, the third person in the dialogue. But so that's where he fits into the story. It's all happening at his house. Okay. So we don't hear his speech, but at the end of it, he asks whether anybody has any questions. Socrates shows up just then after the speech and says, "Hey, Clariphon," who is his friend, Clariphon. Clariphon, could you ask him a question for me? And Clariphon says, "Sure." And he says, the question he wants to ask is, what is rhetoric? Okay. So Clariphon asks Gorgias, what is rhetoric? And Paulus, who is the second person, the second interlocutor, kind of jumps in at that point and says, wait, I'll answer that question. Gorgias is tired. He just gave a big speech. you know what's really kind of happening here is Paulus is trying to play interference because it's Socrates. He refutes everybody. It's going to be an ugly scene, you know? So, you know, Paulus is like, I got to get in here and protect Gorgias. Paulus, by the way, is kind of Gorgias' star student, his protege. So Paulus is sort of to Gorgias what Plato is to Socrates. So, you know, he's trying to kind of head it off and protect his master a bit here, or his teacher. So he jumps in and says, I'll answer that question. He says, it's the noblest art. To which Socrates then responds, that's not an answer at all. I mean, it's more involved than what I have in my notes, but essentially that is the response that Socrates, what are you talking about? The noblest art? That's like saying, oh, it's the greatest. That doesn't tell you anything. So at this point, Socrates and Gorgias decide to dispense with the middlemen and just talk to one another. Now to the first point I have on this list is the difference between oratory and dialectic. So the sophists teach oratory, or oratory is a subset of rhetoric. Oratory is giving great speeches. That's the skill of oratory. That's what Gorgias is well known for, is teaching people how to give good speeches, oratory. But it's a form of rhetoric. So that's his skill. And then dialectic is the methodology of Socrates, as I mentioned in the Apology. Now, a couple things to remark on here is, first of all, when Socrates is asking what is rhetoric, this is not a trick question. I mean, come on. He's just asking the guy, hey, you teach rhetoric? What do you teach? You know, it's a pretty straightforward question. It can't be any more straightforward than that, I don't think. And the second thing to remark, though, is, like I said, Plato could make Gorgias say anything, and he's actually pretty kind to the character Gorgias in this. Gorgias, at the beginning, does agree to keep his answers brief. Notice that. Which is kind of agreeing to play by Socrates' rules, basically, because brief answers is more attuned to dialectic. Oratory is giving a big speech. So instead of answering Socrates' questions by giving a big speech, he's going to keep his answers brief and have a conversation. That's dialectic. So he's agreeing to play by Socrates' rules. That's pretty interesting. So then they go back and forth. I'm not going to recount every one of these things. He asked Gorgias to answer the question, what is rhetoric? He says it's a field of study that deals with words. Then that's not a good enough answer. Oh, I should remark on this, the connection between speaking and thinking. When he says the word words, this you cannot get from the reading, because the word word, in other words, if you're in Greece and you ask, what is the word for something? The word for word is logos, L-O-G-O-S. But it's also the word for thinking. So there's an ambiguity that's in the text that you don't see when you're reading it in English. I mean, it could be that Gorgias is saying that it deals with thinking, but it's a correct translation. He is talking about speaking, because he's an orator. But the word logos means both of those things, interestingly, in Greek, thinking and speaking. So just quick examples. A dialogue. Okay, so that's a speaking one. That's like a conversation between two people. That's a dialogue. That root word is logos. Ology, biology. Okay, ology that means thinking. Bio is life, and logos means thinking. So thinking about life. biology, that's also the root word is logos. Not to mention logic has the root word logos. But so it does mean both of those things, thinking and speaking. So there's a little bit of ambiguity going on at the beginning of this that you can't tell from the, if you're reading in Greek, you could tell, but you can't tell from English. All right, so Socrates points out that words are used in all kinds of things like medicine, and then he says, Gorgias says, but it's entirely through words. And Socrates says, well, that's not specific enough. Okay. And then Gorgias says, but it's also concerned with the noblest of human affairs, like health, beauty, and wealth. And Socrates says, well, if I want to know anything about health, I'll go to a doctor. If I want to know anything about beauty, if I want to get beautiful, I'll go to a personal trainer. By the way, they had such a thing. If I want wealth, I'll talk to a businessman. And then finally, he says, it's about power. It's about rhetoric. It's about power. It's about speaking before crowds. It's about persuasion. And then Socrates says, but don't all subjects also, other subjects also persuade? And Gorgias says it's about persuasions about matters of right and wrong. Again, note that this is a translational thing. The word persuasion doesn't seem to be something you would associate with teachers, but the Greek word, which I'm not sure, I can't remember what the Greek word is. Guess it doesn't matter. But the word that's being translated here would make more sense in Greek. So teachers persuade, and Gorgias says it's a persuasion about matters of right and wrong. Now, here, this is kind of a crucial moment in this dialogue to me. I think this is like the crux of the whole thing. Socrates says, wait a minute, aren't there two types of persuasion? One type of persuasion that's aimed at belief and one that's aimed at knowledge. And Gorgias does agree about this. The distinction between belief and knowledge is huge in Plato. I mean, this is a really, really key distinction that Plato makes all the time. Knowledge and belief are completely different things. And the difference between them here, well, and elsewhere, is that knowledge is always true. Knowledge is always true. There's no such thing as a false knowledge. You don't have false knowledge. I guess you could use those words if you want to, but it doesn't really make any sense. Because if you say something that you know something and someone points out that it's wrong, you don't say, oh shit, I had a false knowledge. No, you don't say that. You say, I thought I knew it. I guess I didn't know that. Knowledge is always true. Belief, on the other hand, is true and false. It is absolutely possible to have a true and a false belief. Okay, so that's the difference. That's the difference. Knowledge is always true, and belief can be true and it can be false. Which one does rhetoric address? Is rhetoric persuasion aimed at knowledge, or is it persuasion aimed at belief? And Gorgias is very forthright here again. He says rhetoric aims at belief only. It's not instructive. It's not. I'm not trying to teach people about right and wrong. I'm trying to persuade people to believe what I want them to believe about matters of right and wrong. Okay. All right, I'll pause for a second. I'm not going to go into a lot of discussion about this right now, but there is something noteworthy here that since Gorgias agrees, you might miss this. He says that it's aimed at belief only, and it's not instructive about right and wrong, but that implies there is such a thing as being instructive about right and wrong, and that there is a knowledge of right and wrong. For Plato, there is a true and a false about right and wrong. I know a lot of people think that morality and morals and ethics is all about just beliefs. Plato completely disagrees about that. I do too. for different reasons. Plato is more idealistic about this, as we'll see with the forms when we get to the Republic. But to me, it's just an incoherent point of view to say that everybody just gets to choose their own morality. All right, like I said, I don't really want to go into a lot of detail about this here in this particular context, but if you think everybody just gets to choose their own morality, that's great until someone rapes and kills your sister or your mother or something. Hey, are you just going to sit back and say, well, they have their own moral beliefs and that's okay with me? Morality is about how we get along with one another. You cannot just say everybody can have their own beliefs. Like, it's not like do you prefer, do you like coffee or do you like chocolate? I mean, people can all have their own opinions about that. Raping and killing somebody, you can't have your own opinion about that. I mean, sorry, morals are not like that. That's an extreme example, but I encourage you to think it through. I mean, someone steals your shit, are you going to say, well, that's okay, you just think stealing's okay? No, you don't think that. Morality is got to have some objectivity. I'm sorry, it's not just about beliefs. I don't know if that will register with you, but think about it. Anyway, back to the dialogue. Socrates says, aren't the real experts consulted in almost every matter except for right and wrong? I mean, when you're sick, you go to the doctor, you don't go to a sophist. And Gorgias actually steps up and says, no, they aren't. And I didn't write this down, but he gives the example of, I could get myself elected town doctor if I wanted to, because even if I was running against a real doctor, remember this is democracy and they're voting, I could get myself elected town doctor because I'm more persuasive. I could talk him into voting for me, even though I'm not a doctor and that guy is a doctor. That's how he's bragging about the power of rhetoric. He has such good speaking skills, and this is again what he's trying to teach, proposing to teach his students is this power. It's about power. It's about, I can get myself elected even if I don't know anything about it. And you can persuade people even if you're not an expert in the field. But right after he says that, he does back away pretty quickly and says, but rhetoric should be used like other competitive arts, like boxing. Because I think he understood how that sounded. Getting yourself elected town doctor when you're not a doctor is probably not a good idea. I mean, right? That sounds a little questionable. And Gorgias is saying, well, you could, but maybe you shouldn't. It's like learning how to box. You learn how to box and now you can beat people up, but you just don't go walk around randomly beating people up. And most importantly, in this case, if someone does learn how to box and beat somebody up, it's not that they shouldn't have. It's not the teacher's fault. In other words, it's not my fault. Gorgias is saying, people, if they use the skill for evil purposes, it's not the teacher's. The teacher isn't guilty for the student's trespasses, right? I'm not going to be blamed for what my students do with rhetoric. All right. So then Socrates says, but wait a minute, we're talking about power in a state and morality. And in this case, isn't the truth the most that the thing that's most important? False opinion in this case, when you're talking about power and morality, is the worst of evils. And you can kind of tell from how Gorgias responds that he's a little bit concerned, but well, that sounds kind of right. And then Socrates says, so what you're telling me is rhetoric makes the ignorant more persuasive among the ignorant than the expert. And that's what he sounded like he was saying, right? He's not a doctor. He's ignorant. He's more persuasive than the expert, the doctor, among the ignorant. And by the way, that's an important point, because Gorgias would never claim to be able to get himself elected head doctor if there were a bunch of doctors, you know, because they'd see through him in a minute, right? They'd know he wasn't a doctor in a heartbeat. It's only the fact that the people voting don't know anything about being a doctor that makes this even possible. So he's more persuasive among the ignorant than the expert. And Socrates says, and this goes for knowledge of right and wrong too, right? That would mean that rhetoric makes the evil appear to be good, or at least it can. That's not a good thing. You don't want that to happen, do you, Gorgias? And Gorgias is like, no, I don't want the evil to appear good. Remember that he's standing in front of a crowd of people. He's not going to be like, yay, evil. Of course he's going to say, I'm not promoting evil. You don't want this to happen, do you, Gorgias? And Gorgias says, no, of course I do not. Well, what are you going to do about it then? And then Gorgias says, well, if someone doesn't know the difference between right and wrong, I will teach them before I teach them how to teach them this power of rhetoric. And Socrates says, well, then the teacher is responsible for what the students do with rhetoric, because you claim to be teaching them right and wrong. And if they do something wrong, it is your fault. And this is where Gorgias loses the argument. It's pretty, I know it's a little subtle. It actually seems a little more subtle than it, or it's a little more subtle than it. Let's put it, how am I going to express this? If you elsewhere, it's clear from what Gorgias said like the real person Gorgias, and also what other people said about him, that he never claimed to teach right and wrong. So when he says this, it's not just in this conversation. He is contradicting a principle that he says all the time in his writings and all sorts of other places. So he is contradicting himself in a big way. It doesn't look that way in the dialogue that it's that big of a deal, but it is a big deal. Anyways, at this point, Gorgias bows out, kind of, and Paulus jumps in. More that. Paulus kind of dives in and sees Gorgias is floundering around, and he's like, I'm going to go in there and save him. And so Paulus dives in and says, he actually says Gorgias is too ashamed to say what he really means. Let me talk to you. And so Paulus jumps into the conversation, and he's the second speaker.